The communications room aboard the Galactic Council station buzzed with routine activity. Officer Thalvin sat at his console, monitoring dozens of frequencies from across known space. His crystalline fingers moved across holographic displays, sorting through commercial traffic, diplomatic channels, and scientific broadcasts. It was boring work, but someone had to do it. Then something unusual appeared on his screen. A signal, desperate and chaotic, cutting across every major frequency at once. Thalvin leaned forward, his translucent skin flickering with concern. The transmission was fragmentary, breaking up and reforming, but the message was clear enough. Someone was screaming for help. He isolated the signal and felt his breathing quicken. It came from the Korthan Collective, a peaceful group of 3 species living in the outer fringe territories. The message cycled through 40 different languages simultaneously, a universal distress protocol used only in the most dire circumstances. Thalvin's hands trembled as he recorded the transmission and rushed it to the council chambers. The Galactic Council chamber was an impressive sight. Representatives from dozens of civilized species sat in circular tiers, debating matters of trade, diplomacy, and law. Ambassador Quell, a dignified bird-like being with brilliant blue plumage, called for attention. His voice carried across the chamber as he played the Korthan transmission. The message told a terrible story. The Vrakan Dominion, a militaristic empire of massive reptilian warriors, had invaded Korthan space 3 months ago. The Korthan defense fleets, small and outdated, had been destroyed in days. Now the Vrakan blockaded their worlds, preparing for final conquest. Billions of civilians huddled in shelters waiting for death. The Korthan had exhausted every diplomatic option. This transmission was their last hope. Ambassador Quell spoke with urgency. The Korthan needed immediate military intervention. Without help, they would be extinct within weeks. He called for a vote to authorize a council peacekeeping force. The debate that followed made Thalvin sick to his stomach. Representative after representative stood to explain why intervention was impossible. The Vrakan were too powerful. A military response might spark a wider war. The council's forces were stretched thin. Perhaps economic sanctions would work better. Maybe another diplomatic mission. The excuses piled up like bodies. After 6 hours of debate, the council voted. They would issue a formal condemnation of Vrakan actions and impose limited trade restrictions. No military aid would be sent. The vote passed overwhelmingly. As the council members filed out, discussing dinner plans and upcoming social events, Thalvin wondered if they understood they had just condemned billions to death. In the observation gallery, a human watched the proceedings with barely controlled anger. Commander Baek Do-yun represented Earth at the Galactic Council, a position he had held for 2 years. He was a career military officer, a veteran of the contact wars that had marked humanity's violent introduction to galactic civilization. He understood politics, but he had never learned to stomach cowardice. Do-yun left the chamber without speaking to anyone. He returned to the human embassy and immediately opened an encrypted channel to Earth. His message was brief and direct. The Galactic Council had abandoned the Korthan Collective to their fate. He recommended independent military action. He attached all tactical data on the Korthan system, the Vrakan blockade fleet, and estimated civilian casualties. Then he waited. He knew Earth's leadership well enough to predict their response, but he also knew the odds. The Vrakan had 60 warships blockading SciFiPrime. Earth could maybe spare a dozen ships without leaving the home system vulnerable. Any rational military assessment would call this a suicide mission. But Do-hyun had learned something about humanity during the contact wars. Rational assessments meant very little to a species that had survived by refusing to accept impossible odds. The response came 18 hours later. Fleet Admiral Kang Minho himself appeared on the secure channel. The admiral was in his 60s, with gray hair and tired eyes that had seen too much war. But his voice was steady as he delivered Earth's decision. Commander, tell the Galactic Council that Earth acknowledges their decision. Then tell them that humanity does not require permission to defend innocent lives. We are dispatching a task force to the Korthan system. They will arrive in 5 days. Do-yun felt something tight in his chest relax. Understood, Admiral. The Korthan don't know we're coming. Should I inform them? Admiral Kang considered this.
No, not yet.
If we fail, I don't want to give them false hope. But if we succeed, they'll know soon enough. Kang out. The transmission ended. Do-hyun sat alone in his office, looking out at the stars beyond the station's viewport. Somewhere out there, the Korthan were dying, and somewhere closer, Earth's fleet was preparing to launch. He thought about the young men and women who would crew those ships, who would fly those fighters, who would maybe die in a system they had never heard of for people they would never meet. This was what made humanity different, Do-hyun realized. Every other species in the galaxy had learned to be practical, to calculate costs and benefits to avoid unnecessary risks. They had grown comfortable and cautious, but humans came from a world that had tried to kill them for millions of years. They had learned to fight impossible odds because surrender meant extinction. They had learned to help each other because alone they died. When humanity reached the stars 15 years ago, they had made a promise. Never again would they stand idle while innocence burned. The galaxy thought it was just propaganda. Pretty words from a naive species that would learn to be more realistic. But Do-hyun knew better. He had fought in the contact wars. He had seen human soldiers hold impossible positions. He had watched human pilots fly missions that should have been suicide runs and somehow come back alive. He had witnessed human medics run into enemy fire to save wounded aliens from species they had just met. Humanity's promise wasn't propaganda. It was who they were. It was written in their genetic code, forged by millions of years of surviving on a death world, refined by thousands of years of brutal history. When someone called for help, humans answered. Even when it was hopeless. Especially when it was hopeless. Do-hyun sent one more message to Admiral Kang, just 3 words. Make them pay. Above Earth, in the orbital shipyards, 12 warships began their final preparations for launch. Crews reported to their stations. Marines loaded equipment. Pilots ran through pre-flight checks. In 5 days, they would arrive at Korthan Prime. In 5 days, the Vraken would learn what happened when you made humans angry. The galaxy was about to discover what Deathworlders truly meant. The Terran fleet dropped out of FTL at the edge of the Korthan system. Captain Yoon Ji-woo watched her tactical display light up with contact markers. 63 Vraken warships formed a blockade around Korthan Prime, the inhabited planet. Each red icon on her screen represented a vessel larger and more heavily armed than anything in her fleet. Tactical analysis, she ordered calmly. Lieutenant Nam Jisoo, the intelligence officer, worked quickly. Vraken formation is standard blockade pattern. They're positioned to intercept any ship trying to reach the planet. Their flagship is at the center, surrounded by dreadnought-class vessels. Each dreadnought carries plasma cannons and missile batteries capable of destroying our ships with a few hits. Commander Lee Taejin studied the display. They're confident. That formation assumes we'll either surrender or try to break through their line. They haven't adjusted for our arrival. Ji-woo allowed herself a small smile. They don't know who we are yet. Let's introduce ourselves. Open all frequencies. Lieutenant Nam activated the communication systems. Captain Ji-woo's voice broadcast across every channel in the system, powerful enough that even the Korthan on the planet below could hear. Attention Vraken forces. This is Captain Yoon Ji-woo of the Terran Defense Fleet. You are conducting military operations against a civilian population in violation of galactic law. Withdraw immediately or face engagement. On the Vraken flagship Dominator, War Leader Throk received the transmission. He was massive even for his species, 3 meters of muscle and scales bred for combat. He had conquered 17 systems through overwhelming force. The galaxy feared the Vraken because they were unstoppable. He studied the data on the approaching fleet. 12 small ships, a species called humans from a planet called Earth. His intelligence officer provided basic information. The humans were newcomers to the galaxy, only 15 years since first contact. Their homeworld was classified as a death world, whatever that meant. Throk laughed. Every species thought their planet was harsh. These humans were probably farmers or merchants trying to play at war. He ordered 5 of his dreadnoughts to intercept and destroy the human fleet. It would be good practice for his warriors. The entire engagement should take less than an hour. The 5 Vraken dreadnoughts broke formation and accelerated toward the Terran fleet. Each ship was enormous, covered in weapon emplacements and thick armor plating. They looked unstoppable because for 50 years they had been. On the Indomitable, Captain Ji-woo watched them approach. They're sending 5 ships. They think that's all they need to destroy us. Should we feel insulted? Commander Lee asked. No, we should make them regret it. All ships formation Delta 7. Focus all fire on the lead vessel. Prepare boarding teams. The tactical officers across the fleet executed her orders. The human ships moved into a tight formation, their point defense systems coming online. Marines in the hangar bays boarded assault shuttles. Fighter pilots climbed into cockpits. Everyone knew their role. The Vraken opened fire first. Massive plasma bolts streaked across space, each one powerful enough to vaporize most galactic warships. 3 bolts hit the indomitable dead center. Alarms screamed. The outer hull plating vaporized instantly, glowing metal boiling into space. But beneath the outer armor were secondary layers, and beneath those tertiary layers, human ships were designed by engineers who understood that in real combat, you got hit. The goal wasn't to avoid damage. It was to survive it. Damage report, Captain Jiwoo ordered. Outer hull sections 12 through 17 destroyed. Secondary armor holding. All systems operational. Jiwoo nodded. Return fire. All batteries. The human ships fired as one, but they didn't use energy weapons like most galactic civilizations. Humans preferred railguns. Simple physics accelerating solid metal to incredible speeds. Dozens of tungsten slugs, each weighing several tons, accelerated to a percentage of light speed. The projectiles hit the lead Vraken dreadnought like the fist of an angry god. Its shields collapsed instantly, overwhelmed by pure kinetic force. The slugs punched through armor plating designed to stop plasma weapons. Secondary explosions rippled through the massive ship as power conduits ruptured and ammunition stores detonated. The Vraken dreadnought broke apart in less than 30 seconds. On the Dominator, War Leader Throck watched in shock. One of his dreadnoughts, a ship that had destroyed dozens of enemy vessels, simply ceased to exist. The humans were still advancing, still firing. A second dreadnought took multiple hits and exploded. "What are they using?" Throck demanded. His weapons officer studied the data. "Kinetic projectiles, War Leader. Solid metal accelerated to extreme velocity. Our shields aren't designed to stop that kind of impact." Throck felt something he hadn't experienced in decades. Uncertainty. These humans fought unlike anything he had encountered. They didn't use elegant energy weapons. They didn't maneuver gracefully. They just hit you with metal and physics and didn't stop until you broke. "All ships concentrate fire on the human flagship," he ordered, but Captain Jiwoo had anticipated this. Evasive pattern Omega, launch fighters and assault shuttles. The Indomitable rolled and twisted, its maneuvering thrusters firing in complex patterns. Plasma bolts that should have destroyed it passed through empty space. From its hangar bays, 120 fighters launched in perfect formation. Behind them came 30 assault shuttles carrying Marines. Flight leader Ojaemin led his squadron directly into the Vraken formation. His fighter was small compared to the massive dreadnoughts, like a mosquito attacking an elephant. But mosquitoes could kill if they hit the right spot. Wolfpack, target the damaged ships. Go for the engine clusters. Make every shot count. His pilots acknowledged and dove toward the crippled Vraken vessels. Point defense fire filled space with deadly streams of energy. But human pilots were trained to fly through hell. Jaemin's fighter took a hit that melted part of his wing, but he held his course. At the last second, he released his missiles and broke away. The Vraken ship's engines exploded. The massive vessel began tumbling out of control. While fighters harassed the enemy, the assault shuttles closed on a damaged dreadnought. Major Han Subin commanded the boarding force, 200 Marines in powered armor. The shuttles attached to the enemy hull and cutting lasers began burning through. Inside the Vraken ship, warriors prepared to repel boarders. Each Vraken soldier stood 3 meters tall and could tear through steel with their bare claws. They had never lost a boarding action. They formed up at the breach point, ready to slaughter whoever dared enter their ship. The hull exploded inward. Smoke and debris filled the corridor. Through the chaos came the humans. Major Subin and her team moved with practiced efficiency. They didn't charge blindly. They used covering fire, tactical positions, and coordinated movement. When a Vraken warrior charged, 3 Marines fired simultaneously at weak points in its armor. The alien fell. The Vraken were stronger individually, but humans fought as a unit, each soldier supporting the others, and humans had something the Vraken didn't understand. They had evolved as persistence predators on a death world. They didn't know when to stop. A Vraken warrior grabbed one Marine and lifted him off the ground, ready to tear him apart. The Marine didn't panic. He simply placed his rifle against the alien's head and fired. Both fell, but other Marines were already moving forward. Major Subin reached the engine room and planted demolition charges. All teams withdraw. 30 seconds to detonation. Her Marines retreated in good order, covering each other as they fell back to the shuttles. The shuttles detached and boosted away. Behind them, the Vrakan dreadnought exploded from within. War leader Throck watched 3 of his 5 dreadnoughts destroyed. The remaining 2 were fleeing back to the main fleet. The human ships hadn't lost a single vessel. They advanced steadily, their weapons still firing, their fighters still swarming. For the first time in his career, Throck gave an order he never thought he would speak. All forward units retreat. Fall back to the main fleet. The surviving Vrakan ships disengaged and fled. On the Indomitable, Captain Jiwoo watched them go. Her crew was cheering, celebrating their victory. But she saw the tactical display and knew this was just the beginning. They had won the first engagement, but 60 enemy ships still waited. She opened a channel to all ships. "Good work, everyone. But we're not done." Those were just 5 ships. "The real battle starts now. All vessels hold formation. Prepare for Phase 2. Below on Korthan Prime, millions of civilians watched the sky. They saw explosions in orbit. They saw the Vrakan fleet pull back. For the first time in months, they dared to hope. Someone had come to help them. Someone was fighting back. Elder Velm, leader of the Korthan Collective, broadcast on all emergency frequencies. "Unknown allies are engaging the Vrakan. Hold on. Help has arrived." In shelters across the planet, exhausted people who had given up on survival began to cry with relief. They didn't know who these aliens were. They didn't care. Someone had answered their call. The orbital shipyards above Earth hummed with activity. Massive construction frames surrounded 12 warships of the Terran Defense Fleet, each vessel receiving final checks and combat loadouts. These were not elegant ships. Most galactic civilizations designed their vessels for beauty and efficiency, sleek curves and polished hulls. Human ships looked like flying fortresses, angular and brutal, covered in armor plating thick enough to stop kinetic rounds. Captain Yoon Jiwoo stood on the bridge of the TDF Indomitable, her flagship and the fleet's carrier. She was 42 years old, with short black hair and a face that rarely smiled. She had earned her command during the contact wars when Earth first encountered hostile alien forces. She had lost ships under her command before. She would probably lose more today. But she had never lost her nerve, and she had never abandoned her crew. Her second officer, Commander Lee Taejin, approached with a data pad. "All ships report ready for departure, Captain. Fleet composition is locked in. We have the Indomitable as carrier flagship, 2 battlecruisers, 3 heavy cruisers, and 6 destroyers. Total crew complement is 14,000. Jiwoo took the pad and reviewed the numbers. 14,000 people, most of them volunteers. Every single person aboard these ships had chosen to risk their lives for strangers. She felt the weight of that responsibility settle on her shoulders, familiar and heavy. "What's the tactical assessment?" she asked. Lee pulled up a holographic display showing the Korthan system. Red icons marked Vrakan positions. 63 warships arranged in a blockade formation around the inhabited planet. "Intelligence says each Vrakan dreadnought outguns any ship we have. They favor massive plasma weapons and missile batteries. Their tactics are simple: overwhelming firepower and numerical superiority. They expect enemies to break and run. Have they ever fought anyone who didn't break?" Jiwoo asked. Lee smiled slightly. "No, Captain. We'll be there first." In the medical bay, several decks below, Dr. Choi Yuna supervised her staff as they prepared trauma centers. She was 50 years old, with gray streaking her black hair and hands that had performed surgery in 3 war zones. She checked equipment personally, making sure every surgical suite had backup power and redundant life support. When fighting started, people would die. Her job was to make sure as few as possible stayed dead. A young medical assistant, barely out of training, approached nervously. "Dr. Choi, is it true we're outnumbered 5 to 1? Yuna finished checking an emergency surgical kit before answering. "Yes, the Vrakan have more ships, bigger guns, and heavier armor. We're probably going to take significant casualties." The assistant looked pale. "Then why are we doing this?" Yuna met the young woman's eyes. "Because 14 years ago, when the Kalesh attacked Earth, we screamed for help. The galaxy ignored us. We barely survived. After that, we made a promise. No one else would face extinction alone, not while we could do something about it." She returned to her preparations. "Now help me set up the emergency triage protocols. We have work to do." In the hangar bays, Flight Leader O. Jamin walked between rows of fighters with his squadron. He was 31, young for a squadron commander, but he had logged more combat hours than pilots twice his age. His fighters were small, heavily armed interceptors designed for close combat. Most galactic species used automated drones or remote-controlled craft. Humans preferred having living pilots. Machines couldn't make the split-second decisions that won impossible battles. "Listen up, Wolfpack," Jamin addressed his pilots. "I know you've heard the numbers. 63 enemy ships, 12 of ours. The galaxy thinks we're crazy for taking this mission." He paused, looking at each pilot in turn. "Maybe we are. But 30 million Corthan civilians are going to die if we don't stop that blockade. So we're going to fly into hell, punch the Vraken in the teeth, and make them wish they'd never heard of humanity." Questions? None of his pilots spoke. They didn't need to. Every one of them had volunteered for this mission knowing the odds. Every one of them would fly into enemy fire without hesitation. That was what it meant to be human. In the engineering sections, Chief Minseok Kwan ran final diagnostics on the reactor cores. Human ships used fusion reactors pushed far beyond normal safety limits. Most species would consider it insane. But humans had learned that safety margins were suggestions, not laws. When you came from a world that tried to kill you daily, you learned to take risks. The reactor status lights all showed green. Power output was nominal. All backup systems were online. Kwan nodded in satisfaction. When the shooting started, these ships would take damage. His job was to keep them running no matter what. On the command deck, Admiral Kang Minho observed the final preparations. At 63, he was one of Earth's most experienced fleet commanders. He had fought in the resource wars before humanity reached space. He had commanded the defense of Earth during the contact wars. He had seen too many friends die, but he had never lost his conviction that some things were worth fighting for. He opened a fleet-wide communication channel. Every screen on every ship showed his face. 14,000 crew members stopped what they were doing to listen. "Crew of the Corthan Task Force, this is Admiral Kang. In a few hours we will depart for a system most of you have never heard of. We go to fight for people we've never met. The Galactic Council calls this mission hopeless. They say we're too few, the enemy too strong. They have abandoned the Corthan to their fate. But the Galactic Council doesn't understand humanity. They don't know what it means to come from a death world, where every generation fought for survival. They don't understand that we learned to help each other because alone we died. They've never known what it means to refuse surrender even when all hope is gone. 30 million Corthan civilians are waiting to die. They think the galaxy has abandoned them. They don't know that 12 human ships are coming. They don't know that humanity never abandons those in need. Today we show the galaxy what Deathworlders do when innocents call for help. All ships prepare for departure. Engage FTL drives on my mark." The crew returned to their stations with renewed purpose. On the Indomitable's bridge, Captain Jiwoo watched her tactical display as all 12 ships reported ready. Green lights appeared next to each vessel's icon. The fleet was ready. "All ships acknowledge ready status," Commander Lee reported. "FTL coordinates locked. We can jump on your order, Captain." Jiwoo took a breath. Once they jumped, there was no turning back. 63 enemy ships waited at the other end. Many of her crew would not return. But those who did would know they saved an entire civilization. "Signal from Admiral Kang," Lee said. "All ships jump in 30 seconds. The bridge crew counted down silently. At 0, space around the 12 ships rippled and tore. One by one, the vessels of Earth's fleet vanished in flashes of twisted spacetime, leaving Earth orbit empty. They would arrive at the Corthan system in 4 days. 4 days to prepare for a battle that would either save millions or end in disaster. 4 days before the galaxy learned what happened when you made humanity choose between safety and justice. The Vraken had never fought Deathworlders before. They were about to get an education. War Leader Throck stood in the command center of his flagship, surrounded by tactical displays showing the human fleet. 5 of his dreadnoughts had been destroyed in less than 20 minutes. His warriors, bred for conquest, had been beaten by an enemy they outnumbered. The defeat burned in his chest like acid. His second officer, War Strategist Dren, approached cautiously. "War Leader, perhaps we should request reinforcements. These humans use tactics we have never encountered." Throck struck him across the face with enough force to crack bone. The strategist fell but did not cry out. Showing weakness was death among the Vraken. "We are Vraken," Throck roared. "We have conquered 17 systems. We do not call for help against 12 ships." He turned to his tactical officer. "Form a wall formation." All 58 remaining ships advanced together. We will crush them with overwhelming firepower. The Vraken fleet moved into position. 58 massive warships formed a line kilometers wide. Every weapon was charged and ready. It was a formation that had never failed. The enemy would either surrender or be vaporized. There was no third option. On the Indomitable, Captain Yoon Ji-woo studied the enemy formation. They're using mass and firepower to compensate for tactical weakness. It's what I would do if I didn't know any better. Commander Lee Taejin pulled up a simulation. If they maintain that formation and concentrate fire, they'll destroy us through sheer volume. We can't survive a sustained engagement. Then we don't give them one, Ji-woo said. She opened a channel to Admiral Kang. Admiral requesting authorization for Protocol Thermopylae. There was a pause. Protocol Thermopylae was named after an ancient Earth battle where 300 soldiers held a mountain pass against an army of thousands. It was a desperation tactic that required perfect timing and absolute trust between captains. One mistake and the entire fleet would be destroyed. Admiral Kang's voice came through. Authorized. All ships are to follow your lead, Captain. Make it count, Ji-woo turned to her crew. Helm, plot a direct intercept course with the Vraken line. Maximum acceleration. The helmsman looked up in shock. Captain, that's suicide. They'll concentrate all fire on us. Do it, Ji-woo said calmly. The Indomitable surged forward, directly toward the wall of enemy ships. The other human vessels followed. On every Vraken ship, weapons officers prepared to fire. The humans were charging straight at them. It made no tactical sense. It was suicide. But at the last possible moment, the human fleet split. 4 groups of 3 ships each dove in different directions, exploiting gaps in the Vraken formation. It was a maneuver that required split-second timing and absolute coordination. Most species couldn't execute it. But humans had been flying fighters and coordinating fleet actions for centuries before they reached space. The Vraken formation collapsed into chaos. The massive ships were designed for long-range bombardment. At close range, their weapons couldn't track the rapidly maneuvering human vessels. The battle became a confused melee, exactly what Captain Ji-woo wanted. The Indomitable raced through the Vraken fleet, its point defense systems destroying incoming missiles while its railguns fired at any target that presented itself. A Vraken dreadnought tried to turn and bring its main batteries to bear. It was too slow. 3 human cruisers focused fire on its bridge section. The ship's command center exploded, and the dreadnought went dead in space. Flight leader Oh Jae-min led his squadron between the massive enemy ships. His targeting computer screamed warnings about the enemy point defense, but he ignored them. Human pilots were trained to fly through situations that would make other species panic. Wolfpack, form up on me. We're going for the engines on that dreadnought. His squadron dove toward a Vraken ship weaving through defensive fire. 2 of his pilots were hit and destroyed instantly. Jamin felt the loss like a knife to the gut, but he didn't break formation. The mission came first. He released his missiles and pulled away. Behind him, the dreadnought's engines erupted in flames, but the human fleet was taking damage. The destroyer Daejeon's shield took a direct hit from a plasma cannon. Its forward sections vaporized. 200 crew members died in seconds. The ship tumbled out of control, its reactor going critical. Captain Ji-woo watched the ship's icon disappear from her tactical display. She had served with the captain of the Daejeon shield. They had graduated from the academy together. Now he was gone along with his entire crew. Press the attack, she ordered, her voice hard. Don't let their sacrifice be in vain. In the medical bay, Dr. Choi Yuna worked frantically on wounded crew members. Burns, shrapnel wounds, radiation exposure, decompression injuries. The casualties kept coming. A young ensign, maybe 20 years old, died on her operating table despite everything she tried. She noted the time of death, took one breath to steady herself and moved to the next patient. This was the cost of war. But if they won, 30 million Korthan civilians would live. That mathematics was cold and brutal, but it was real. Major Han Subin led another boarding action, this time targeting the Vraken flagship itself. Her assault shuttle attached to the Dominator's hull. Cutting lasers burned through the armor. Her Marines poured into the enemy ship. The Vraken crew fought with desperate fury. These aliens had boarded their flagship, the symbol of their power. It was an insult that could not be tolerated. But the humans moved like they were born for close combat. Every movement was efficient. Every shot was placed with precision. Subin's team fought their way toward the reactor core. A massive Vraken warrior blocked the corridor, wielding a weapon that could tear through her armor. She threw a flashbang grenade, momentarily blinding the alien, then shot out its knee joints. It fell and her team moved past it. They reached the reactor room. Subin placed charges on the coolant systems and started the timer. All teams extract now. 30 seconds. Her Marines retreated in good order, fighting their way back to the shuttles. They detached from the hull just as the charges detonated. The reactor's coolant system failed. Warning alarms screamed throughout the Dominator. War Leader Throck watched his ship's systems fail. Engineering reported the reactor was overheating. They had maybe 5 minutes before catastrophic failure. Around him, the battle was turning into a disaster. 17 more of his ships had been destroyed. The humans were everywhere, coordinating their attacks with impossible precision. He finally understood. These weren't just soldiers. These were predators who had evolved on a world so hostile that only the strongest, smartest, and most adaptable survived. They didn't fight with honor or glory. They fought to win, and they used every advantage without hesitation. All ships retreat, Throck ordered. The words tasted like poison. Full withdrawal from the system. Across the Vrakan fleet, captains received the order with shock. They had never retreated. But they saw their flagship crippled, saw nearly half their fleet destroyed, and they knew they had no choice. The surviving Vrakan ships engaged their FTL drives and fled. One by one, they vanished from the system. Captain Jiwoo watched the last enemy ship disappear. The bridge crew erupted in cheers. They had done it. 12 human ships had broken a blockade of 60, but Jiwoo saw the casualty reports. 847 dead. The Daejeon's shield and its entire crew. 2 cruisers heavily damaged. Dozens of fighters that hadn't returned. The victory had cost them dearly. She opened a channel to the planet below. SciFiPrime, this is Captain Yoon Jiwoo of the Terran Defense Fleet. The blockade is broken. You are free. On the planet's surface, Elder Velm heard the transmission and collapsed to his knees. Around him, millions of Korthan emerged from shelters, looking up at a sky no longer filled with enemy ships. They were crying, laughing, embracing each other. They had been abandoned by the galaxy, but someone had come anyway. Someone had fought for them when all hope was gone. The Korthan would remember this day for 1,000 generations. The ruins of SciFiPrime's capital city stretched for kilometers. Buildings that had stood for centuries were now broken shells. Streets were filled with rubble, but through the devastation, life was returning. The Vrakan fleet was gone, driven away by 12 human ships that had answered a desperate call. Dr. Choi Yuna stepped off the transport shuttle and looked at the destruction. She had seen war zones before, but this was different. This wasn't a battlefield. It was a civilian population that had been under siege for months. Behind her, medical teams unloaded supplies and equipment. A Korthan healer approached nervously. The alien was tall and slender, with translucent skin that showed bioluminescent patterns beneath. Through a translator, the healer spoke. "Thank you for coming. We have many wounded, too many. Our medical facilities were destroyed weeks ago." Yuna nodded. "Show me where they are. We'll set up field hospitals and start treatment immediately." Over the next hours, human medical teams worked alongside Korthan healers. The physiology was different, but pain and suffering looked the same in any species. Yuna treated radiation burns, malnutrition, injuries from collapsed buildings. A Korthan child, maybe 6 years old by their species standard, had a broken leg that had healed wrong because there had been no medical care available. Yuna rebroke it carefully and set it properly. The child's parent wept with gratitude. In another part of the city, Engineering Chief Kwon Min-seok and his teams worked to restore power grids. The Vrakan bombardment had destroyed the main power stations. Millions of Korthan had been living without electricity, clean water, or proper sanitation. Min-seok's engineers pulled power conduits from the human ships and rigged temporary generators. It wasn't elegant, but it worked. A young Korthan technician watched in amazement as the humans worked. "You do all this after just fighting a battle? You must be exhausted." Min-seok wiped sweat from his face. "We're tired. But you need power more than we need rest. That's how it works." Major Han Subin oversaw the distribution of emergency supplies. Her Marines, still in combat armor, unloaded crates of food, water purification tablets, and medical equipment. A young private, Sergeant Lim Hyun-woo, was giving his own rations to a group of Korthan children when Subin found him. "Sergeant, you need to eat too," she said. Hyun-woo looked at the children, who were thin from months of limited food. I'll eat later, Major. They need it more. Subin didn't argue. She had seen human soldiers make that same choice in every war zone she had served in. It was who they were. Above the planet on the Indomitable, Captain Yoon Jiwoo stood in the ship's memorial hall. Holographic displays showed the faces of every crew member lost in the battle. 847 names. 847 people who had volunteered for this mission, knowing they might not return. Commander Lee Tae-jin found her there. The crew is asking about memorial services. Jiwoo nodded slowly. Schedule them. Full honors for everyone, and make sure their families on Earth receive personal messages. They deserve to know their loved ones saved an entire civilization. Lee hesitated. Captain, some of the crew are saying we paid too high a price. That we should have let the Galactic Council handle it. Jiwoo turned to face him. And how many Korthan would be alive if we had waited for the Council? The answer is 0. 847 of our people died. 30 million Korthan lived. That's not a price too high. That's what it costs to do the right thing. A message came from the planet's surface. Elder Velm, leader of the Korthan Collective, requested to meet with Admiral Kang. The meeting was arranged aboard the Indomitable. Elder Velm arrived with a delegation of Korthan survivors. The old historian looked exhausted, his bioluminescent patterns dim with grief and stress. But when he saw Admiral Kang, he bowed deeply, a gesture of profound respect in Korthan culture. Admiral Kang, Velm said through the translator, we broadcast our plea across the galaxy. 1,000 civilizations heard us. The Galactic Council debated for hours and did nothing. But you came. You fought for us. You saved us. Why? Admiral Kang was quiet for a moment, choosing his words carefully. Because we know what it's like to be helpless. Humanity's history is full of moments when we needed help and received none. We've seen what happens when good people do nothing while innocents suffer. When we reached the stars, we promised ourselves we would never be those people. We would never turn away when someone called for help. Velm's bioluminescent patterns brightened, showing deep emotion. You lost many warriors in our defense. How can we ever repay such a debt? There is no debt, Kang said firmly. We didn't do this for payment or gratitude. We did it because it was right. If you want to honor our fallen, rebuild your civilization. Live free. That's enough. Velm reached into his robes and pulled out a crystalline object roughly the size of a human fist. It glowed with internal light, showing complex patterns frozen in the crystal structure. This is a memory stone, Velm explained. Our most sacred cultural artifact. We create them to preserve the most important moments in our history. This one shows your fleet arriving in our system, moving to intercept an enemy that outnumbered you. Every Korthan child for the next 1,000 years will see this moment. They will know that when our galaxy abandoned us, the Deathworlders came. Kang accepted the gift with reverence. He understood what it meant. The Korthan were a species of historians and artists. This was their highest honor. After the delegation left, Kang stood alone, holding the memory stone. He thought about the 847 names in the memorial hall, each one a person who had volunteered, who had fought, who had died so others could live. That was the true strength of humanity. Not their weapons or their tactics, but their willingness to sacrifice for others. News of the Korthan liberation spread across the galaxy at the speed of light. On the Galactic Council Station, emergency sessions were called. Representatives debated what humanity's intervention meant for galactic politics. Ambassador Quell, who had first brought the Korthan plea to the Council, stood before the assembly. The humans did what we could not. They faced impossible odds and won. Some of you are grateful. Others are afraid. But all of you now understand what Deathworlders truly are. In a quiet corner of the station, Commander Baek Do-hyun received casualty reports from the fleet. He had served with some of those names, had trained with them, had called them friends. He read each name carefully, honoring their memory. Then he sent a message to Earth Command. Mission successful. Korthan system secured. Vrakan threat neutralized. Recommend continued operations to protect vulnerable civilizations. The response came quickly from Admiral Kang, who was preparing the fleet for departure. Approved. But we're going home first. The fleet needs repairs and the crew needs rest. We'll return to Earth, refit, and then continue our mission. 3 days later, the Terran fleet prepared to leave Korthan space. On the planet below, millions of Korthan gathered to watch the ships depart. Elder Velm broadcast a message on all frequencies. To the humans of Earth, you came when no one else would. You fought when fighting seemed hopeless. You saved us when we had accepted death. The Corthan Collective will never forget. You will always have allies among our people. May your journey home be safe, and may the galaxy learn from your example. Captain Yoon Ji-woo stood on the bridge of the Indomitable as the fleet formed up. The ship bore scars from the battle, patched hull sections, and temporary repairs. It looked like a veteran of a brutal war because it was. All ships report ready for jump, Commander Lee reported. Ji-woo looked at the tactical display one last time. The Corthan system was secure. 30 million people were free. 847 crew members wouldn't see Earth again. But their sacrifice had meaning. Take us home, she ordered. The fleet engaged FTL drives and vanished in flashes of twisted spacetime. Back on Earth, 6 days later, the fleet arrived in orbit. They were met by messages from across the planet. Parades were being planned. Medals would be awarded. The crew members would be celebrated as heroes. But in the quiet moments between the celebrations, the veterans of the Corthan campaign remembered what they had seen. The desperate faces of civilians who thought they would die. The gratitude in Eldervelm's eyes. The names of friends who hadn't come home. Sergeant Lim Hyunwoo sat in his bunk, looking at a message he had received from the Corthan child he had given his rations to. The child had drawn a picture of a human soldier with the words, "Thank you for being brave," written in translated Corthan script. He pinned it above his bunk. This was why they fought. Not for glory or conquest, but for moments like this. For children who would grow up free because someone had been willing to answer their call. Admiral Kang stood in his office, holding the memory stone. Through the crystal, he could see the frozen moment when 12 human ships dropped out of FTL and moved to engage 60 enemy vessels. It was a moment of absolute commitment, when humanity had chosen justice over safety. He placed the memory stone in a place of honor and opened a communication to Earth Defense Command. There would be more calls for help, more desperate civilizations abandoned by a cautious galaxy, and humanity would answer as many times as needed, because that was what Deathworlders did. They fought impossible odds. They helped those who couldn't help themselves.